Let's get curious about cars. Specifically, what if we got rid of cars? Now, regardless of how you feel about cars, let's let this question sink in as we dig in and discover a little more about cars and the roles that they play in our lives. And what if we got rid of them? What would we do? Wherever you live, you probably have many cars around you. America especially likes cars. Ford Motor Company, General Motors Corporation, Chrysler, and others started in America. And there are countless movies and songs that romanticize cars and driving. No wonder America likes cars so much. It's a part of the culture. Jane Jacobs, urban activist and writer, thought that cities, including rural ones, are a balance of two things: city function and transportation. Grocery stores, bookshops, big business buildings, homes, these are all containers of city functions. It's what's happening in the city. They take place in these containers of functions. Transportation is how we get from one city function container to the next. You could walk, bike, drive a car, take a bus, or fly your blimp. These are all forms of transportation. City functions are the place we want to be, though. We don't want to be driving around all day. We want to be hanging out, riding roller coasters, sitting in the park, hanging out with our friends, doing work. We want to be doing things. So what if we got rid of cars? Well, roads take up a lot of space, but if we didn't have cars, buses, trucks, or other large vehicles that need that space, we could fill it in with more activities. If we got rid of cars today, we'd certainly have a lot of empty space between buildings, especially where parking lots used to be. Think of all the weirdly shaped buildings we could put between current buildings. Think of all the new activities that would be so much closer to where you live. But would it be harder to get there? So think about that. All of these places where cars currently are or hang out, from parking lots to streets and roads, right? Those would be all empty and unused. So what if we could fill those with other activities, with other services, with other city function containers, right? What would it be? Now, the question, though, is there may be more things there and there may be more to do, but how would you get there? Remember, there's two different parts. One is the city function and the other is the transportation. So we may have more things, but maybe it's a little harder to get there. I don't know. There's a lot to explore with this question of what if we did not have cars. Now, we mentioned Jane Jacobs. Let's dig a little deeper on who this amazing person was. Jane Jacobs is an urban activist and writer. Jane Jacobs started as a writer in New York City. For her pieces, she went to different parts of the city for inspiration. Over time, Jacobs learned a lot about the city and eventually wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She wrote this as someone who had no formal training in public planning, the study and profession of putting cities together. So you get that? Public planning or planning cities is a career, pretty fascinating career. And if you're curious about cities, how they function or how they could function better, I would encourage you to look into becoming a city planner or look into working with city planning in some capacity. Well, it is now one of the most important books about cities, this Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. And she has affected cities beyond measure. Jacobs believed that cities are made of all sorts of people and that buildings and neighborhoods should reflect that. When New York City planners wanted to demolish homes of the poor so a highway could be built, she fought them for a more balanced city. If you have an area of your city with mixed-use buildings, like homes, businesses, and shops all in the same structure, you might have a city planner who is inspired by Jacobs. So even if you haven't read her book, you can see evidence or results from people who have read her books, probably in your neighborhood. Now, there's a great activity that you can do to take your curiosity about cities, about cars, about transportation, and this question of what if there were no cars. It's a great activity that you can do some action around this. So it's just called You Fill in the Streets. What would you put between our buildings if cars and similar transportation, like buses, just disappeared? Draw two pictures. Your first picture should be of a street including cars, people, and buildings, kind of like it is today. Then draw your second picture of the same street, but replace all the cars and roads with new buildings. or activities. And then you could have a side-by-side comparison of these two realities, of what one looks like with cars and one without. Now, another interesting thing that you may want to do is we talk about, oh, we don't have cars, we could do all these things. But what would that mean for transportation? What if this was an opportunity not only to reinvent or reimagine or create what the world would look like without cars and how we'd fill in those spaces, but what if it's an opportunity to create a new or the next form of transportation? Now, if you were to ask someone, 200 years ago and ask them, well, how do you think people would get around in the future? They'd probably say, well, with a horse, right? Or a horse and a carriage. Just like today, if you're to ask most people, well, how do you think people are going to get around for transportation, 100 years from now or 200 years from now? They'll probably say cars, and who knows, they may even say flying cars. But what if there's a different form of transportation? And even if you can't go far off into the future, what if you just took something like current vehicles and a bicycle and just wrote two lists, make a Venn diagram of all the benefits or the good things about cars and all the good things or benefits about bicycles, and see where they overlap, and see if you can create something that takes all of the good things but leaves the negative things out of each. You'd be really curious to see not only how you design or create the city space or your neighborhood without cars, but what if you also work to create the next form of transportation in a world without cars? Thank you, and as always, stay curious.